The sun bled orange across the water, painting the surface of Lake Serenity in molten gold. I sat on the edge of my dock, bare feet dangling above the glassy surface, a cold beer sweating in my hand. My dog, Bear, lay beside me, snoring softly. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called, a mournful, echoing cry that had greeted me every evening for the past 17 years. This was my place, my sanctuary. I bought the land back in 2006, right after the tech bubble burst, and I cashed out of my startup. I sold my condo in San Francisco, packed up my life, and drove north until the trees got taller and the people fewer. I found this spot, 10 acres of forested shoreline, a crumbling cabin, and a private dock jutting into the clearest water I'd ever seen. I spent 2 years rebuilding the cabin, hand-laying the stone fireplace, and planting wildflowers along the path to the lake. It wasn't just a house. It was a promise I made to myself. No more meetings, no more emails, no more people telling me what to do. And for a while, it worked. Then the developers came. First, it was just rumors, whispers at the general store in town about a new luxury lakeside community being planned. I didn't pay much attention. This was protected land, or so I thought. Then the signs went up. Lakeview Pines Estates, coming soon. Renderings of sleek, modern cabins with floor-to-ceiling windows and private patios. A brochure in the mailbox. A glossy pamphlet that smelled like money and lies. I called the county. No permits had been filed. I called the State Environmental Board. Nothing. So I assumed it was just hype. Then the HOA arrived. Not just any HOA, the Lakeview Pines Homeowners Association, a corporate entity registered in Delaware, with a board of directors I'd never met, a website with stock photos of smiling families, and a legal team that could probably sue a glacier into retreating. They claimed they owned the surrounding land, that my property was landlocked and non-conforming, that the lake access I'd used for nearly 2 decades was technically part of a shared recreational easement. And then, one Tuesday morning in May, a man in a Navy suit showed up at my door with a court order and a bulldozer behind him. "Mr. Callahan," he said, adjusting his tie, "we're here to reclaim the shoreline for the community development. You have 7 days to vacate." I stood there, barefoot, still in my flannel pajamas, staring at the yellow machine idling in my driveway. "Reclaim?" I said. "This is my land." He smiled, thin and practiced. "Not according to the deed." I found out later they'd bought up the surrounding parcels, dozens of them, over the past 3 years, quietly, through shell companies. They'd used eminent domain arguments, pressured elderly owners, and exploited zoning loopholes. And somehow, they'd convinced a judge that my private dock, my beach, my lakefront was part of a planned recreational corridor. They tore it all down in 4 days. My dock, my fire pit, the little wooden sign that said Bear and Jack's Place, all of it gone. They built 120 cabins in its place. Identical prefab units with identical decks, identical flower boxes, and identical families who arrived on weekends with matching kayaks and Bluetooth speakers. And the HOA sent me a bill for $4,200 a year in mandatory community fees. I didn't pay. They sued, I lost, and I sat there on what used to be my dock, now a concrete platform labeled Community Access Point Number 3, and watched them turn my lake into a theme park. But here's what they didn't know. They didn't own the dam. And I did. Chapter 1. The man who built the dam, my grandfather, Silas Callahan, was a civil engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers during the Dust Bowl. He spent his life building things that lasted: bridges, reservoirs, floodgates. In 1952, he came up here to inspect a proposed dam site on the Blackwater River, a tributary that fed into Lake Serenity. He fell in love with the valley. Instead of building a government dam, he petitioned the state to let him construct a private one small, low impact, meant to regulate seasonal flooding and provide hydropower for a handful of homesteads. He called it Callahan's Cut, and for $25,000 and a promise to maintain it, the state granted him a 99-year lease on the land surrounding the dam site. He built it by hand with a crew of 6 over 2 brutal winters. Reinforced concrete, steel gates, a manual override system. It was finished in 1955, and it worked perfectly. When he died in 1978, he left it to my father. When my father died in 2001, he left it to me. The dam wasn't on my lakefront property. It was 3 miles upstream, tucked into a narrow gorge, surrounded by dense forest. Most people didn't even know it existed. The HOA certainly didn't, and that was their first mistake. I visited the dam every spring and fall, checking the gates, clearing debris, testing the manual release. It was old, but solid. I kept the records, the maintenance logs, the original lease agreement locked in a fireproof box in my cabin. I never thought I'd use it as a weapon. But after they took my lakefront, I started thinking differently. Chapter 2. The first board meeting. They invited me to the inaugural Lakeview Pines HOA meeting in June. Community engagement is vital, said Evelyn Cho, the HOA president, a woman in her 50s with a bob, haircut and a voice like a spreadsheet. I showed up in my fishing vest. Bear on a leash. The meeting was held in the new community center, a glass and steel monstrosity with a rooftop deck and a lake view that looked directly at my old property line. There were about 50 people there, mostly weekenders, tech, workers from the city, retirees with too much time and money. They sat in folding chairs, sipping wine from plastic glasses, listening to Evelyn drone on about shared values, architectural harmony, and noise ordinances. Then they got to the agenda item, property line disputes. Jack Callahan, Evelyn said, scanning the room. Are you here? I raised my hand. Thank you for coming. As you know, your continued use of community access point number 3 is in violation of Section 4.2 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. We kindly ask that you cease all unauthorized use of HOA facilities. I stood up. You took my dock, my beach, my view. You built a strip mall of cabins where my wildflowers used to grow. And now you're charging me to live on my own land? A murmur went through the crowd. Evelyn didn't flinch. The court ruled in our favor, Mr. Callahan. The shoreline is now part of the common area. Your cabin remains, but your access rights have been redefined. Redefined by who? A judge who's never been here? Who's never seen the loons at dawn? We're trying to build a community, said a man in a polo shirt. You're just being difficult. I looked at him. You live in cabin 47. I watched you put up a satellite dish last week. That violates the CC&Rs too. Section 3.8. No external antennas. He blinked. That's temporary. Everything here is temporary, I said, including your lake. Evelyn leaned forward. Excuse me? I smiled. You don't own the water. You just think you do. I left before they could respond. Bear growled all the way home. Chapter 3. The Water Wars Begin. I started small. First, I stopped paying the HOA fees. Then, I filed a complaint with the State Environmental Agency about unpermitted shoreline modification. I included before and after photos of my dock being torn down. No action was taken. Next, I posted videos online, raw footage of the construction, the noise, the destruction of native plants. I tagged environmental groups, local news, anyone who might care. The HOA responded with a cease and desist letter, citing defamation and harassment. I posted the letter too. Then I found their weak spot. Water rights. Lake Serenity was fed by the Blackwater River, which was regulated by my dam. The lake's water level fluctuated seasonally, but the dam kept it stable, usually between 520 and 522 feet above sea level. But it didn't have to. I pulled out the old engineering. Schematics. The dam had 3 release gates. Normally, they were open just enough to maintain flow, but they could be closed entirely, or opened wide. I also discovered something interesting. The HOA's development permit required them to maintain a minimum lake level for recreational usability. If the water dropped more than 3 feet, they'd be in violation, and if the lake rose too high, their cabins, built right up to the new flood line, would be at risk. I smiled for the first time in months. Chapter 4. The night I closed the gates, it was July 12th. I drove up to the dam at 2 a.m., Bear in the passenger seat. The forest was quiet. No one came up here. The road was barely passable, overgrown with ferns and fallen branches. The dam itself stood like a forgotten monument. Gray concrete, moss-covered, the gates rusted but functional. I opened the control panel. It was analog, levers, gauges, a hand-cranked override. No digital systems, no remote access, just steel and sweat. I closed all 3 gates. Slowly, the river slowed, then stopped. By morning, the flow into Lake Serenity had dropped to a trickle. Noon, the water level had dropped 2 inches. By the end of the week, it was down 8 inches. By the end of the month, nearly 2 feet. Chapter 5. Panic at the Lake. The HOA didn't notice at first, but then the kayaks started scraping bottom. Then the boat ramps became unusable. Then the shoreline expanded, muddy, stinking, covered in algae and dead fish. They held an emergency meeting. I watched from the trees. Evelyn stood at the podium, face tight. We're experiencing an unprecedented drop in lake levels. The state says it's a natural fluctuation. But I don't believe that. A man in a Hawaiian shirt stood up. My boat's stuck. I paid $40,000 for that cabin for the lake access. Another woman. The smell is unbearable. I can't open my windows. Then someone said what they were all thinking. What about Callahan? Evelyn hesitated. We can't accuse him without evidence. Oh, come on, a man shouted. He's the only one who lives upriver. He's got that old dam. I smiled. They were starting to connect the dots. Chapter 6. The Investigation. They sent a water committee to investigate. 3 men in khakis and hiking boots showed up at my door. We're looking into the lake level issue, said the leader. A guy named Greg with a clipboard. We heard you might know something about the dam. I sipped my coffee. I maintain it. It's my family's. Can we see it? No. Why not? Private property. Also, it's dangerous. Old machinery. One wrong move and the whole thing could fail. Greg frowned. We're just trying to help. You're trying to find out if I'm behind the low water. He didn't deny it. I leaned forward. Tell Evelyn something for me. Tell her the lake gave me peace for 17 years. She took that. Now the lake's giving her a problem. Maybe she should reflect on that. They left. The next day, a drone buzzed over my property. I shot it down with my grandfather's .22, filed a report. Unauthorized surveillance, trespassing, violation of FAA regulations. The HOA got a warning from the county. I got a smile. Chapter 7. The Legal Battle. They sued me, claimed I was manipulating natural water flow for malicious purposes, asked for an injunction to force the reopening of the dam gates. I hired a lawyer, Maggie Reyes, a former environmental prosecutor with a spine of steel and a love of underdogs. They can't prove you did anything illegal, she said. You're the legal operator of the dam. You're allowed to adjust flow for maintenance. But I closed all the gates. Then say you were testing the system, performing routine checks. The state gives dam operators wide discretion. And if they demand access, then they need a warrant. And if they come with one, make sure they bring a structural engineer. That dam is 70 years old. One wrong step and it could collapse, she grinned. Let them try. The judge dismissed the injunction. The lake kept dropping. Chapter 8. The algae bloom by late August, the lake was a disaster. With low flow and warm temperatures, an algae bloom exploded. Green, toxic scum covered the surface. The smell was like rotten eggs and death. The state issued a health advisory. Avoid contact with water. Do not drink. Do not swim. The HOA's rental cabins sat empty. Their luxury lakefront experience was now a biohazard. Evelyn called a town hall. "We're working with the state," she said, voice shaking. "We're bringing in aerators. We're testing the water. This will pass." A man stood up. "It's August. My family's vacation is ruined. I paid $5,000 for this week." Another. "My daughter got a rash from wading in. Is this safe?" Evelyn had no answers. I watched from the back. After the meeting, I approached her. "You wanted a community," I said. "Now you've got one. A community of suffering." She turned on me. "This is your doing." "Is it? Or is it what happens when you pave paradise and put up a parking lot?" She lunged at me. I stepped back. Security pulled her away. I left, with Bear whistling. Chapter 9. The rising water. I had planned to keep the gates closed until winter. But then I saw the news. A massive storm was coming. Storm Evelyn. They called it a cruel joke. Forecast: 12 inches of rain in 48 hours. If the dam gates stayed closed, the reservoir behind the dam would fill too fast. The pressure could breach the structure, and if the dam broke, the flood would wipe out the entire Lakeview Pines development. Hundreds of people, cottages, cars, lives, swept away in a wall of water. I stood at the dam the night before the storm. Bear sat beside me, ears perked. The sky was black. The wind howled through the trees. I thought about the people down there. Some of them were just trying to enjoy a weekend. Some were innocent. I thought about my dock, my peace, my stolen sunsets, and I thought about my grandfather. He built this dam to protect people, not to destroy them. I opened the gates, slowly at first, then wider. I released enough water to lower the reservoir level, creating buffer space for the incoming storm. All night, I stayed there, monitoring the gauges, adjusting the flow. When the rain came, the dam held. The lake rose, but not catastrophically, and the cabins, they survived. Chapter 10. The aftermath. The storm passed. The lake stabilized. The algae began to clear, and the HOA, they were broken. Membership plummeted. Fees went unpaid. Lawsuits piled up from renters demanding refunds. Evelyn resigned. The developer pulled out. By winter, half the cabins were for sale, and I rebuilt my dock. Not the old one. A new one, stronger, higher, built to last. I added a sign, Callahan's. Cove, private property, no trespassing, especially HOAs. I didn't open the dam again, but I didn't have to. The lake remembered, and so did I. Epilogue. The loon's return. It was early spring. The ice had just broken on the lake. I sat on my new dock, Bear beside me, coffee steaming in my hand. The water was clear, the air crisp. And then I heard it. A single, echoing call. I turned. There, gliding across the surface, was a loon, alone. Beautiful, free. I smiled. The HOA hadn't taken everything. Some things, like peace, like memory, like the right to sit by the water and listen to the wild, couldn't be owned. They could only be earned. And I had.